The cannoli broke in my mouth like a small firecracker. That is what I remember. Plain as anything. The sound of it. The way the shell shattered against my teeth at the very instant my son-in-law raised his glass at the head table and told 260 people that I was stepping aside. I was 60 years old that night. I had been a Petrelli for 60 years, and the owner of Petrelli's Trattoria for 32. My only daughter, Sophia, had just married a man named Ethan Calloway, a Harvard MBA with a smile that could close a bank loan in a single meeting, and the flagship dining room of my flagship restaurant had been transformed into something that looked more like a state dinner than a wedding reception. There were $18,000 chandeliers above us. There were 2 violins from the Chicago Symphony tucked into the corner near the espresso bar. I want you to know that I am glad you are here tonight. Stay with me until the end of this story, and tell me in the comments which city you are listening from, because I want to know how far this thing has traveled. It deserves to travel. It cost me too much for it not to. Now, the toast. Ethan stood up slowly, the way men who own rooms stand up. He had practiced this. I could tell by the way his cufflinks caught the chandelier light at exactly the right second. "Before the first dance," he said, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of forks and Sinatra coming through the speakers. "I want to take a moment to thank my new family." There was the usual round of polite applause. The alderman from our ward smiled at me from table 7. Father DeLuca, our parish priest, nodded the way priests nod when they have known you since you were an altar boy with skinned knees. And especially, Ethan continued, lifting his champagne flute toward me at the head table, I want to honor my father-in-law, Frank Petrelli, as he gracefully steps aside to enjoy his grandchildren and trusts me to carry his legacy forward. The room broke into applause. Not polite applause this time. Full applause. The kind that sweeps up from the back tables and washes forward like a tide. I want to tell you that I reacted, that I stood up, that I said something, anything. But the truth is, I did nothing at all, because at that exact moment I had just bitten into my cannoli. And the cannoli, Madonna mia, the cannoli broke in my mouth like a small firecracker. And the sweet ricotta and the bright orange zest filled my tongue all at once. And I sat very still and watched 260 people clap for my own funeral. My brother Vincent was clapping the loudest. I noticed that the way a man notices a leak in a roof at 3 a.m. Vincent, 56 years old, my baby brother, the boy I used to walk to school with through the snow on Taylor Street, holding his hand because his fingers were always too cold. Vincent was on his feet now, beaming, slamming his palms together with such enthusiasm that the woman beside him had to lean back to avoid being struck. My daughter, Sophia, was at Ethan's elbow. She had her left hand wrapped around his right bicep, and she was smiling. Not a polite bride smile, not a tired bride smile. The smile of a woman who had been told something good was about to happen and was waiting for it to land. And the long family table beside me, with its 8 chairs, and the one chair always left empty for my mother, who had been dead 4 years and could not be persuaded otherwise. That table was the only thing in the room that was not clapping. Ethan said a few more words. Something about vision. Something about the next generation. Something about how blessed the Calloway name and the Petrelli name were to be joined. I did not hear most of it. I was looking down at my plate. There was a silver fork in my right hand. A linen napkin folded across my lap, pressed that afternoon by a woman who had been ironing napkins in this restaurant since before Sophia was born. My grandfather's pocket watch was a small, heavy weight against my hip, inside my vest pocket, the one I had touched for luck before I walked into the room 2 hours earlier. The watch was solid silver, Sicilian, engraved inside the lid in my grandmother's handwriting. Tu non sei solo. You are not alone. I set the fork down very gently on the rim of the plate. I had not, as far as I could remember, signed a single piece of paper agreeing to step aside from anything. I had not been asked. I had not been consulted. I had not, in any room, in any meeting, in any quiet Sunday breakfast with Vincent, agreed to gracefully retire from the restaurant my father had opened in 1968, with money he had borrowed from his own godfather in $2,000 increments, because that was all the godfather could lend at one time. And yet the room was clapping. Vincent was on his feet. Sophia was smiling. The empty chair at my mother's place was holding its silence, the way only the dead can hold silence. And the cannoli, which had been the best thing I had eaten all night, suddenly had no taste at all. I let it sit a moment longer, willing the flavor back. It would not come. The taste was gone. The way a light is gone when someone has flipped the switch in another room. I closed my mouth. I swallowed. And I understood, in that one swallow, that I had walked into my own daughter's wedding wearing my best vest and my father's watch, and that something had been arranged around me by people who loved me the way certain people love a useful piece of furniture. They had measured the room without me in it. They had written the toast, and I had walked in carrying cannoli on a porcelain plate. I left the head table without anyone really noticing. That is the strange thing about being honored at a banquet. The moment the toast ends, the spotlight slides off you and onto the cake, or the bride, or whoever wants it next, and you can walk straight out of the room like a man whose chair has been reclaimed by air. I rose slowly, set my linen napkin beside the porcelain plate, and crossed the dining room along the wall, past the second violinist who was tuning his instrument for the first dance. I told myself I was going to find Sophia. I went through the swinging service door and into my own kitchen. This was the kitchen my father had built with his bare hands in 1968. The kitchen I had walked into every day of my adult life. The sugo was simmering on the back burner the way it always was on Sunday nights, in the deep copper pot my grandmother had pressed into my mother's hands on her wedding day. 6 hours that pot had been on the stove. The smell of it, garlic and basil and slow tomatoes, hit me harder than the toast had. Mauro, my line cook, was leaning against the prep counter eating bread. "Boss," he said, mouth full. "You all right?" I nodded. He looked at me a second longer than he needed to. Mauro had been with me 11 years. He knew the difference between a Frank who was all right and a Frank who was not. He did not push it. I crossed the kitchen, past the line, past the dish pit, to the narrow wooden staircase that led up to the second-floor office. My father had built that staircase, too. He used to climb up there at the end of every night and count the cash by lamplight. He kept the books in green ledgers and drew straight columns with a wooden ruler. He had not trusted spreadsheets, and I had not, in 32 years, found a better system. Halfway up the stairs, I heard the laughter. I stopped on the 7th step, hand on the painted white wall. The laughter was coming from the office. 2 voices, Vincent and Ethan. I will be honest with you. There was no reason yet to think anything more than that the brother of the bride and the new son-in-law had come up here to pour themselves a real drink, away from the wives and the cake. There was always a bottle of grappa on the cabinet behind my father's desk, but I stayed I climbed 2 more steps, very quietly, until I was just below the doorway, out of sight but in earshot. "The smoothest takeover I have ever seen," Vincent was saying. His voice had the loose, glad quality of a man on his second pour. "You should have seen his face, Ethan. He just sat there and ate his cannoli." There was a clink. 2 small glass tumblers meeting in the air. 22 million, Ethan said. 22 million for the 3 locations, the brand, the lease on this building. And the man does not even know the papers went to the buyer this morning. "He will sign on Friday," Vincent said. "I promise you. Frankie has signed every paper Sophia has ever put in front of him. And the federal partners, they are handled. I told you. They are handled." There was another clink, and then the soft, almost affectionate laugh of 2 men who believed they had already won. I stood there on the 7th step for what felt like a very long time. I will not pretend I made a careful decision. I was 60 years old, and my body went numb, and my legs took me backward down the stairs without my asking. I did not breathe until I was in the kitchen again. Mauro was still at the prep counter. He did not look up. I think he had already understood that whatever it was not his to see. I walked out of the kitchen into the dim, narrow hallway between the wine cellar and the coat check. And there on the carpet, half under the small bench by the coat rack, was a folded white linen napkin. It was not one of mine. I knew my own napkins. Heavy Belgian linen, hand-hemmed, with a small embroidered P in the bottom corner. This one was a different weight. Lighter. The corner was not embroidered. It was screen-printed, in dark green ink. De Napoli Restaurant Group. I had never heard of De Napoli Restaurant Group. I picked the napkin up. I folded it in half. Then I folded it again, very deliberately, the way my father had taught me to fold a napkin when I was 8, and I held it the way a man holds the only piece of evidence he has. At the end of the hallway, beside the door back to the dining room, there was a tall mirror in a gold-leafed Venetian frame my mother had hung there in 1992 and had never permitted to be moved. I had walked past it 4,000 times. I had never looked. I looked now. The man in the glass was wearing my best wool vest. He had my grandfather's pocket watch in the small pocket above his heart. He had the same dark eyes my mother had given him, and the same gray at the temples I had earned the slow way. But he was not me. I do not know how else to say it. The man in that mirror was not the man who had walked into the restaurant 2 hours earlier. That man, the one with the cannoli and the watch and the daughter on his arm, had left the building during the toast, and the one staring back, holding a folded napkin in his right hand, was a stranger I had not yet met. I tucked the napkin into the inside pocket of my vest. Then I straightened my tie, the way my father had taught me to straighten a tie, and I walked back into the dining room to dance with my daughter, holding the only piece of evidence I had against her against my chest. I do not remember the dance. It was the only dance I would ever have with my daughter on her wedding day. The first violinist played a waltz my mother had loved. Sophia rested her head on my shoulder for a moment, the way she had done as a small girl, and she said something I could not quite hear over the music. I smiled because I was supposed to smile. I led her through 3 steps and a turn. The song ended. Another began. A younger man cut in, and I stepped off the dance floor and let the rest of the wedding happen without me. By midnight, the room had thinned to the relatives who never leave a wedding. By 12:30, even those were gone. By 1, The kitchen had been wiped, the chairs had been stacked, and the lights of Petrelli's had been dimmed to half. I stood near the door, pulling my overcoat on, and I felt the empty inside pocket of my vest, the way a man feels a missing tooth. The pocket watch was not there. I checked the other side. I checked my trouser pocket. I checked the floor around the head table. Nothing. My grandfather's watch. The watch my father had carried to his own wedding. The watch I had touched for luck 7 hours earlier was gone. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. Little Italy at 1 in the morning in late October has its own particular quiet. The neon sign above the door, Petrelli's, was burning half dead, only the first and last 2 letters still lit. So what was advertised to the empty street was a word that looked like P-E-L-L-S. Sleet was falling in small, uncertain pieces. A taxi rolled by without stopping, and underneath the streetlight on the opposite corner, in an open black wool overcoat over his long black soutane, stood Father DeLuca. He had been waiting. I do not know how long. His shoulders were dark with damp. His hat brim glistened. He raised one gloved hand the way a man raises a hand to a friend across a station platform, and he crossed the empty street without hurrying. "Frank," he said. "Father." He looked at me for a long moment in the way that priests look at people whose pain they have already prayed for. He was 70 years old. He had baptized me. He had buried my father. He had buried my mother. "Your mother told me," he said, "that there would be a night like this. She asked me to wait." I said nothing. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and brought out a small folded square of paper. Cream-colored, heavy, plain. A note. She left instructions. Frank. Specific ones. I am not to give you the rest of what she gave me until tomorrow, and only if you come alone. He placed the folded note in my hand. "Come to St. Anthony's tomorrow, after the 11 o'clock Mass. Tell no one. Not your brother. Not your daughter." He paused. "She was very clear about your daughter." I stood there on the sidewalk holding the folded paper and feeling the sleet collect on the brim of my hat. Father DeLuca pressed my shoulder once, the way priests press shoulders, and turned, and began walking back the way he had come, the wet October wind lifting the hem of his soutane. "Father," I said. He turned. How long had she been waiting, my mother? How long had she been waiting for tonight? He smiled a small, sad smile. 4 years. Frank. She knew before she went. He was gone around the corner, and I was alone on the sidewalk with a piece of paper I had not opened. I almost did not turn around, but there was a small sound behind me, light and quick. And I looked back to see a young woman in a long black photographer's coat coming out of the door of Petrelli's. She had a camera bag slung across her chest. I had seen her all evening, lifting her lens at the right moments. "Mr. Petrelli," she said. "I am sorry. I would have caught you sooner." She held something out to me in her open palm. The silver watch. My grandfather's watch. The Sicilian one. "It fell," she said. "Near the cake table. I have been keeping it safe for you." I took it from her hand. My fingers were colder than the metal. I opened the lid out of old habit, and the 3 words my grandmother had written on the inside almost 100 years ago caught the dim glow of the half-dead neon sign above us. "Tu non sei solo." "How did you know it was mine?" I said. She did not answer. She looked at me a moment, then smiled. A small, careful smile. The way you smile at a man whose grief is not yet his to discuss. "I just did," she said. She tipped her hat to me, the way a man would, and walked away down the empty street. I drove home with the note in the glove compartment and the watch warming slowly in my hand. At a red light on Ashland Avenue, with no other cars in sight, I opened the compartment again, took the note out, and turned it over. On the back, in pencil, in handwriting I had not seen in 4 years. My mother had written 3 small words. I did not read them. I do not mean I could not. I mean I sat there at a green light on an empty street, holding a piece of paper my dead mother had written on, and I could not bring myself to look at what she had said. Whatever it was, I knew it was going to change the shape of every room I walked into for the rest of my life. I folded the paper and tucked it back. I drove home with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed flat over my chest, where the watch had been put back. And I told myself, in a voice that did not sound like my own, that whatever she had to say, she could say it tomorrow. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock on Sunday morning. I had not slept. I was sitting at my kitchen table in last night's dress shirt, sleeves rolled, the vest hanging on the back of the chair. My mother's 3 unread words on the table beside the salt cellar, where she had always kept them in her own kitchen for the last 20 years of her life. The pocket watch was on the table too, the lid open, the engraving facing the ceiling. Tu non sei solo. I had been looking at it for about an hour. The doorbell rang a second time. Then a familiar knock. 3 quick, 1 slow. The Petrelli knock. My brother had been knocking it on doors of mine since we were boys. "Frankie," Vincent called from the porch. "I have the cornetti." He had a box from Caputo's under his left arm. I could see it through the small window in the kitchen door. Pink string, white cardboard. The same bakery our father had bought breakfast from after Mass every Sunday for 32 years, and that Vincent and I had been buying breakfast from for the 11 years since our father died. I let him in. "Madonna mia, you look terrible," Vincent said. He kissed the side of my face, the way men in our family kiss the sides of each other's faces, set the box on the counter, and went straight to the mocha pot, the way he had been going straight to my mocha pot since he was 9 years old. "Sit. I will make the coffee. You look like you have not slept." "I have not slept. It is normal." Father of the bride. 28 years of feeding her. Then one night, and she is gone. He laughed, lit the gas, ran water into the bottom of the mocha. "Sophia stayed at the Drake last night. She and Ethan fly to Positano tomorrow." I sat. I watched him fill the basket with the espresso the way I would have filled it. Screw the top on with the half twist our father had taught both of us, and place the mocha on the blue flame. He worked in my kitchen the way a man works in a kitchen he has decided already belongs to him. I had never noticed it before. Now it was the only thing I could see. He brought the cornetti to the table on the green ceramic plate our mother had given me the year she moved out of the Oak Park house. He poured the espresso into the small white cups our father had owned. He sat down across from me, took the first cornetto, broke it in half with his thumbs, and laid the larger half on my saucer. "Eat," he said. "You will feel better." I did not eat. "Vincent," I said, "I have a question. Anything. Did this thing Ethan said last night. About the legacy. About me stepping aside." Vincent set down his cup. I watched his face very carefully. There was a flicker, small, expert, almost invisible, and then his eyes softened, his shoulders dropped, and pained concern came into his face the way a man pulls on a coat. "Frankie," he said quietly, "you don't remember what? The papers. 6 months ago. You signed them in your office. With Sophia." He reached across the table and put his hand on my wrist. "Frankie, we were worried. Sophia called me crying. She said you had been forgetting things. Small things at first, then bigger ones. She said you had asked her the same question twice in a single morning. The papers were her idea, to protect you, to make sure the restaurants were not lost while while you got the help you needed." I looked down at his hand on my wrist. I had not, in 60 years, forgotten a single thing my brother had told me. I had not, in the last 12 months, forgotten anything at all except for the names of 2 tax accountants Lou Castellucci had suggested in March, and I had forgotten those because they were idiots. "I see," I said. "Frankie." Vincent's voice was very soft now. "Do not be upset. We love you. Ethan is a good man. He has good instincts. He has already met with the federal partners, and they are all very pleased." The word landed. He did not catch it. He kept talking. He talked about Positano. He talked about the new wine list. He talked about how relieved he was that I was finally going to rest. Finally going to have the years with my grandchildren that our father had not lived long enough to have. I let him talk. I drank my espresso. I broke a piece off the cornetto I did not want and held it in my fingers like an actor holding a prop. When he stood up to leave, 20 minutes later, I stood up too. I walked him to the door. I let him kiss the side of my face again. I told him to thank Sophia for me. I told him I would see him on Friday. "Frankie," he said in the doorway, his hand on my shoulder, "you are doing the right thing. Papa would be proud." He left. I closed the door. I stood in the front hall for a moment, with my hand still on the doorknob and the warmth of his palm still on my shoulder. And I waited until I heard his car pull away from the curb. Then I went back to the kitchen and rinsed my espresso cup under the cold tap. My hand was not shaking. I picked up my phone. I opened the Notes app. I typed 3 words. Federal partners. DiNapoli. I set the phone face down on the table beside my grandfather's open pocket watch and my mother's 3 unread ones. And I looked out the kitchen window at the small olive tree in the terracotta pot on the sill. The one my mother had planted with her own hands in 1985. The one she had never let anyone else water. The one that was, somehow, still alive. It moved in the morning light as if it were nodding at me. The 3 words were on the back of the paper for almost 10 more hours before I finally read them. I read them at 20 minutes past 10 on Sunday morning, sitting in the same kitchen chair I had been sitting in since 1 o'clock the night before, with a cold cup of espresso between my elbows and the dishes from Vincent's visit still on the table. The light through the window had moved from the curtain to the salt cellar to the back of the chair across from me. I had watched it move. I picked up my mother's note. I unfolded it. I turned it over. 3 words, in pencil, in her small, slanted hand. "Forgive me, Frank." I read them once. I read them again. Then I sat very still for 2 minutes, while the kitchen clock kept time the way kitchen clocks do, and I tried, and failed, to imagine what my dead mother could possibly need forgiveness for. I went to the bedroom. I put on a black wool suit. I shaved. I tucked the pocket watch into the small vest pocket the way my father had taught me. I drove the 7 miles to St. Anthony's and arrived at 5 minutes to 11, in time to slide into a back pew and stand for the opening hymn. I did not pray during the Mass. I am not proud of that. But I sat there. In the church my mother had been baptized in, married in, eulogized in, and I could not pray. I could only watch Father DeLuca move in his white vestments behind the altar. The same Marco DeLuca who had stood under a streetlight in sleet 10 hours earlier. And I felt a strange, settled quiet, the kind a man feels in the corner of a room he has been brought to without knowing why. At the consecration, he raised the host. Our eyes met for a second across the heads of the parishioners. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. After the recessional, he found me on the steps. He took my elbow. "This way," he said. He led me around the side of the church, through a low arched door I had not walked through since I was a boy, and into the small sacristy where the vestments were kept. He closed the door behind us. He turned a key in the lock. The room was barely larger than my kitchen pantry. Stone walls, candles in a row on a long wooden table, the smell of beeswax and old incense and clean cotton. On the table, in the center, was a yellowed envelope. It looked like it had been opened and resealed at least once. The corners were soft. The wax seal on the back, dark red, was unbroken. Beside the envelope lay a small brass key on a piece of twine. She came to me 4 weeks before she went, Father DeLuca said. She drove herself, 84 years old, drove herself to my back door in the rain on a Thursday afternoon. She brought a wooden box and these 2 things, and she made me promise to keep them in the safe behind the altar until the night you needed them. He paused. He looked at the envelope for a long moment, and then she said to me, "Marco, when Vincent comes for everything one day, give these to Frank, but only after he has been wounded enough to understand what I am about to tell him." Those were her exact words. Wounded enough. I have remembered them for 4 years. I picked up the envelope. I broke the wax seal with my thumbnail. I sat down on the small wooden stool beside the table, opened the envelope, and pulled out 3 sheets of cream paper folded together, covered front and back in my mother's small, slanted handwriting. The same hand that had written, "Forgive me, Frank." The first line caught me before I was ready for it. Figlio mio. If you are reading this, your brother has finally done what I always knew he would. I had to close my eyes for a moment. I opened them. I read on, "My son, I am going to tell you many things now, and many of them are going to make you angry with me, because I kept them from you for years. I do not apologize for that yet. I will apologize at the end of this letter, if you let me. For now, listen. Vincent has been planning to take the restaurant since you turned 55. I have watched him do it. He started by becoming useful. He moved into bookkeeping that should not have been his. He found a young man, an outsider, with good manners and a Harvard degree. And he placed that young man in the path of your daughter. And he was patient. Vincent has always been patient. Patience was the one thing your father never figured out about him. There was more on the page. I could see her hand had pressed harder in some places. I could see where she had stopped to breathe. I lifted my eyes to Father DeLuca. He nodded once. I turned to the second page. My mother had drawn a small map at the top. It was my own house, the Oak Park house, the one I had inherited from her when she died, the one I had walked the halls of for 4 years and never gone into a single room of without good reason. She had drawn an arrow to the small back bedroom at the end of the upstairs hallway, the room with the door I had not opened since the day we carried her out of it. Beneath the arrow, 2 lines. Take the key. Open my room. Everything you need is there. Tell no one where you are going, especially Vincent. And then, in pencil, the same pencil she had written, "Forgive me." Frank with "Bring the watch." I drove from St. Anthony's to the Oak Park house without thinking once about the route. I have driven those 8 miles, maybe 4,000 times in my life. The streets did not require me. I sat at red lights with my hand on the brass key in my coat pocket and the envelope on the seat beside me, and I tried very hard to feel anything at all. The house was empty. I had moved into it after my mother died, but I had moved into it the way an only son moves into the house his mother has left him. I had used the kitchen and the front parlor and the bedroom that had been mine as a boy. And I had walked past the door at the end of the upstairs hallway twice a day for 4 years, and I had not turned the knob. I climbed the stairs. The afternoon light was orange through the round window on the landing. The hallway smelled the way it had always smelled, of cedar from the linen press and of something older that I had never been able to name. I stood in front of the door for a long moment. Then I took the brass key out of my pocket, slid it into the lock, and turned it. The lock opened with the small, clean click of something that had been waiting 4 years to be asked. I pushed the door open. The smell came out at me first. Camphor, lavender, the dry sweetness of paper that had been kept in a closed room. And underneath those, the faintest trace of the rosewater my mother had worn since she was a young woman. I had not smelled it in 4 years. It went through me like a hand. The room was exactly as we had left it on the morning of her funeral. The bedspread was turned down. The rosary was draped over the headboard. On the dresser, in its silver frame, was my father in his army uniform, 23 years old, in 1960. Beside him, a smaller frame held me at 5, holding a small wooden plane she had whittled for me herself. The Madonna on the wall above the bed, the chipped statue of St. Anthony she had refused to throw out, the carved olive wood box on the vanity in the corner. The box was the one she had brought back from Catania the year I was born. I crossed the room and lifted the lid. There were 3 things inside. The first was a small stack of notebooks, 6 in all. The cheap kind sold at the parish bookstore, with cardboard covers and lined pages. The top notebook was dated on the inside cover. In her hand, Vincent. Year 1. The next Vincent. Year 2. And so on. Through year 6, the second was a thick manila folder with photocopies of legal documents, the corners worn from being handled often. I did not open it yet. I could see, even folded into the folder, what looked like signature pages with my name on them, pages I had not signed. The third was a small white envelope with the word "Pictures" written across the front in pencil. I opened the picture envelope first. There were 36 photographs inside. The first was a black and white picture of a boy of about 8, standing on a sunlit sidewalk in a Cubs t-shirt, holding what looked like a paper cup of lemonade and laughing at someone outside the frame. I had never seen this boy before in my life. I almost set the photograph down. I almost moved on. Then I looked at it again. There was something in the shape of his mouth, something in the bones of his cheek, something I could not place but could not look away from. I flipped to the next photograph. The same boy, a year or two older, in a school uniform, sitting at a desk. Then again, older. A teenager now. The date stamped on the back, 1999, 2003. The boy was a young man, lean, in a kitchen apron, holding a spatula and laughing. 2010. Older still. Working with a knife at a butcher block. Picture after picture. The same person growing up in front of me. The hairline changing, the shoulders thickening, the face filling out. Year after year. I flipped back to the first photograph. I turned it over. There was no name on the back, no date, no location, nothing. I went through all 36. None of them was marked. Only at the very bottom of the stack, in the margin of the last photograph, in pencil, in her hand. She had written a single line. Phoenix. He's waiting. I sat down. There was a small armchair beside the window where my mother had read every evening of her later life. The cushion was still indented in the shape she had left it. I sat in it without thinking, and I held the stack of 36 photographs in my lap, and I looked at her photograph on the dresser across the room. For the first time in 60 years, I could not read what her eyes were trying to tell me. I sat there a long time. When I finally looked back into the olive wood box, there was one more thing I had missed. Lying flat against the bottom, under where the notebooks had been, was a small business card. Cream stock, heavy, 2 lines, Alessandra Russo, Esquire, and below it, in pencil, in the same hand that had written, "Forgive me, Frank and Phoenix. He's waiting." My mother had added one more instruction. Go to her before you trust anyone else. I read 3 of the notebooks that Sunday night. I sat at the kitchen table with my mother's olive wood box open in front of me, the salt cellar and the watch and the letter from the priest arranged carefully around it. I read Vincent. Year 1, I read Vincent. Year 2, I read Vincent. Year 3. Then I stopped. Not because the writing got worse. It did not. But because by the 3rd notebook, by the entry dated November 4th, 2018, my mother had begun making a list of the people my brother had spoken to at a small private banquet at Petrelli's, and the 3rd name on her list was the name of the young man my daughter was going to marry 1 year and 10 months later. My mother had written, beside Ethan's name, in her usual small, slanted hand, Harvard, 28. Smiles too quickly. Vincent's man. I closed the notebook. I did not sleep that night. At 7 the next morning, I shaved, put on a navy suit, took the brass key and the envelope and the business card and the watch, and drove downtown to the LaSalle Street Tower, whose address my mother had pressed against the bottom of an olive wood box 4 years before. The receptionist on the 32nd floor was a young woman with rimless glasses who looked at me, looked at the business card I placed on the desk in front of her, and stood up immediately. "This way, Mr. Petrelli," she said. "Ms. Russo has been expecting you for some time." I had not called. I had not made an appointment. She led me through a glass corridor of empty offices, all of them dark for a Monday morning before 9, and stopped at the last door on the left. She knocked once. She did not wait for an answer. She pushed the door open and stepped aside. The woman behind the desk stood up. She was, by my guess, 50 years old, tall, slim, Her hair was iron gray, cut short, and she wore a charcoal suit, the way a woman who had given up wearing other colors years ago wears a charcoal suit. There was an espresso machine on the credenza behind her. There was a single framed certificate on the wall. No family photographs. "Mr. Petrelli," she said. Her English was clipped, careful, the kind of English a woman from Florence speaks after 35 years in America. "Your mother told me you would come. The only question was when." She gestured at the chair across from her desk. I sat. "My name is Alessandra Russo. Your mother retained me in 2019, 4 months before she passed. Before that, I was a clerk in the Northern District of Illinois. I have been waiting on her instructions for the morning you walked through that door. I am very sorry it has taken this many years." She did not waste a sentence. "I am going to walk you through what your mother set up, in the order she intended. There is a great deal. I will go slowly." She opened a large manila folder on her desk. "The Petrelli Family Trust, 2019, restructured." For the next 20 minutes, Alessandra Russo explained to me how my mother had quietly taken the family trust apart and rebuilt it. She described founding members and shares of interest, voting structures, succession protocols. She used words like irrevocable and fiduciary and named beneficiary. She did not condescend to me. She also did not pretend I was following all of it. When she finished, she folded her hands on the desk. "That," she said, "is the part of the trust that anyone with a court order or a discovery motion can see. Now, you brought something with you. Show me." I took the voluntary buyout agreement out of my inside coat pocket. The one Vincent had brought that fall, the one I had supposedly already signed, and slid it across the desk. She read the first page in about 11 seconds. She turned to the second page. She read that one in about 8. She set the document down. She smiled, a very small smile. The smile of a woman who has been waiting a long time to be allowed to smile. "This isn't worth the paper it's printed on," she said. "But that's not the interesting part." She opened the locked drawer on the right side of her desk and took out 2 sealed envelopes. They were both cream-colored, both heavy, both with my mother's wax in dark red on the back. One was marked with a small handwritten one. The other was marked 2. She placed envelope number 1 on the desk between us. "This one I am authorized to open today," she said. "Your mother left me a specific phrase that triggers it. The phrase was, I quote, 'Show him what is on paper.' I have just spoken the phrase." She broke the seal. She removed a single page. She read it once, herself, the way a lawyer reads anything before allowing a client to see it. Then she turned it toward me. It was a single paragraph. In legal language I had to read twice to follow. There was a clause my mother had inserted into the trust in October of 2019. A clause that required the consent of all 5 founding members of the Petrelli Family Trust before any controlling interest could be transferred. All 5. Antonio, deceased. Rosa, deceased. Frank, Vincent. And a 5th name that had been redacted with my mother's own pen. I lifted my eyes. "Who is the 5th member?" I said. Alessandra Russo set her hand on the second envelope, the one still sealed, the one marked with a 2. "That," she said, "is what your mother sealed." She did not pick the envelope up. She left her hand on it. "And I am not permitted to open it until you can tell me, in your own words, The phrase your mother left for that purpose. She wrote it down once, in her own hand, in a place only you would think to look. She held my eyes. You will know it when you find it. I went back to the Oak Park house Monday night with one task in front of me. The phrase my mother had written in her own hand in a place only I would think to look. I sat in her room from 6 in the evening until past midnight. The 6 notebooks fanned out on the cedar floor around me. A thermos of coffee at my elbow. The stack of 36 photographs on the dresser where I had set them. I read every page of Vincent. Year 1. I read Vincent. Year 2 through 6. I read the legal photocopies. I read the marginalia in her prayer book. I read the cards she had kept from my father's last birthday. None of it sounded like a password. All of it sounded like the voice of a woman who had been watching her own family for 10 years with her hands folded and her mouth closed. At 2:45 in the morning, I stood up to refill my coffee, and I caught my own face in the mirror over the dresser. I looked like a man who had not slept in 2 days, which I was. I looked like my father. That stopped me, because the moment I saw my father in the mirror, I remembered a Sunday afternoon when I was 9 years old. My mother had taken me into the back kitchen at the original Petrelli's on Taylor Street to teach me how to make bread. Not the cook's bread. Her bread. The bread her own mother had taught her in Sicily. She had let me knead it for an hour. She had let me push the dough into the brick oven with the long wooden paddle, and when the first loaf came out, burned across the bottom, and I had stood there with my eyes filling, ready to cry the way 9-year-old boys cry over things they cannot fix. She had taken my chin in her hand and turned my face up to hers and said something in Sicilian I had never heard her say before, and never heard her say again. Quando il fuoco viene, ricorda chi ha acceso il forno. When the fire comes, remember who lit the oven. I sat down on the edge of her bed. I had a phrase. I slept 4 hours. I shaved. I drove back to La Salle Street at the time the receptionist had told me Alessandra Russo arrived every morning, which was 7:15. The receptionist looked up. She nodded. She did not stand this time. She gestured down the corridor. Alessandra Russo was at her desk, drinking espresso from a small white cup. She set the cup down when I walked in. She did not greet me. Quando il fuoco viene, I said, ricorda chi ha acceso il forno. Alessandra Russo closed her eyes for a moment. I had not expected that. When she opened them, she was already reaching into the locked drawer. She placed envelope number 2 on the desk. She broke the wax seal. She removed 3 pages this time, paper-clipped, and laid them out in front of me, and she walked me through them one by one. The clause in envelope number 1 had only stated that the consent of 5 founding members was required. The papers in envelope number 2 were the working machinery. My mother had assigned her own voting share. By notarized successor designation filed in 2019 with the Cook County Recorder, to one specific named individual. That individual's identity was not disclosed in these pages. The trust language stated only that the successor was, quote, a Petrelli by blood, of sound mind, residing in the continental United States. The instructions for opening envelope number 3, which contained the identity, were 2 lines long. I read the 2 lines. The first said, this envelope may not be opened until Frank Petrelli has personally met the successor face to face. The second said he must look him in the eye. I lifted my head. Who is the 5th member? Alessandra Russo folded her hands. Your mother instructed me not to open envelope 3 until you can prove you have looked him in the eye. Mr. Petrelli. I do not know who he is. I do not know where he is. Your mother told me, she said, that you already do. She paused. She said you would be given the clue in her room. She said when you had found it, you would either know what to do, or you would not. She left that part to you. I sat there for a long moment. Phoenix. He's waiting. I had taken the line for a destination. It was a destination. I had not understood, until that moment in Alessandra Russo's office, that the destination was a person. Mr. Petrelli, Alessandra Russo said, very quietly. There is no controlling interest transfer of Petrelli's without that man's signature. Vincent does not know he exists. Ethan does not know he exists. Your mother went to great trouble to keep him invisible. He will not be easy to find. I stood up. He is in Phoenix, I said. She did not answer. I walked out of her office, took the elevator down 32 floors, and crossed the lobby to the underground garage. I sat in my car for a long time without starting the engine. A Petrelli by blood, 34 years old, living in Phoenix. I had taken Phoenix to be a place. I had not taken it to be a man, and I had not taken the man to be anyone I knew. But I had walked through my mother's house believing I knew every Petrelli by blood there had ever been. And I had been wrong. I did not start the engine. I sat with both hands on the wheel and watched my breath leave my mouth in the cold of the garage. And I tried to remember if I had ever seen the boy in the photographs in a face I already knew. I started the engine at 20 minutes past 8. I did not drive home. I drove south. I drove down Halsted Street past the gentrified storefronts of the West Loop and into Bridgeport, where Lou Castellucci had been keeping the books of every Italian family business on the south side of Chicago since he came out of accounting school in 1981. Lou had been keeping mine for 30 years. He had buried 2 wives. He had 2 grandchildren. He smoked thin Italian cigars in his office in defiance of the city of Chicago, and the smell of them had soaked so deep into the walls that nobody who came to him for tax help thought to mention it. I parked at the curb in front of his small storefront and walked in without an appointment. Frankie. Lou stood up behind his desk, the way an old friend stands up. He came around to embrace me. He smelled like cigars and toasted bread. What is wrong? You look like a man with a fire in his house. I have a fire in my house, I said. I took the voluntary buyout agreement out of my coat pocket and laid it on the desk between us. Lou, look at the signature. Lou looked at me first. Then he sat down. He took out his reading glasses, the magnifying glass he kept in his top drawer, and a small jeweler's loupe he had brought back from a trip to Florence in 2005. He examined the 3rd page for almost 5 minutes without speaking. When he set the loupe down, he sat back in his chair, took off his reading glasses, and folded his hands. Frankie, he said, this signature on the buyout, it's yours, but it isn't. I waited. This is a scan, a real scan, from a real signature you made. Look here. He pushed the magnifying glass back to me and pointed at a section of the signed line. See the pressure on the loop of the F even. No tail. That is not how you sign on a Tuesday. That is how you sign when the paper underneath is firmer. You signed this on top of a single page. Probably a page on a clipboard. You were standing. How do you know I was standing? The kerning. Lou shrugged. When you sit, your hand drops a few millimeters at the end of the line. Look at the end of the line. It is level, standing. I felt a small cold sensation along the back of my neck. Lou. What else? He moved the loop again. And here, he tapped at the descender of one letter. See this little pixel ladder where the ink fades that is not ink fading. That is a high-resolution scan being printed back onto paper. A real pen leaves a softer feather. This one has a step. 3 or 4 steps. Whoever did this used a good printer. Not a great one. He pointed next at the bottom right corner of the signed line, where there was the faintest gray shadow that I had not noticed. A thumb smudge. Your right thumb. You took the paper back. Your thumb pressed the lower right because you were hurrying. This signature came from a document where you handed it back fast. 5 seconds. Maybe 10. You did not even let the ink dry. I sat very still. A document I had signed standing on a clipboard in 5 seconds. In a hurry. I tried to remember. I remembered. It was in the late summer of 2018. A Wednesday, I think. I had been on my way out the door of the Petrelli's office on Taylor Street, late for a meeting with a wine vendor, my coat already halfway on, when my daughter, Sophia, had stopped me on the threshold with a clipboard in her hand and a small white form on top of it. She had been 26 years old. She had been finishing the master's degree she had taken 3 years to complete at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She had said something like, "Papa, the bursar needs your signature on this tuition transfer, or they will hold my last semester. It is only the co-signer block." 2 seconds. She had been wearing the small gold cross her grandmother had given her at her confirmation. The hallway smelled faintly of the apricot shampoo she had used since she was 12. I had signed without reading. I had signed standing. I had handed the clipboard back fast. I had not even let the ink dry. I do not remember the door closing behind me after I left. I do not remember the meeting with the wine vendor. I remember only the sound of my daughter saying thank you, Papa, in the way she had said it since she was small. I sat in Lou Castellucci's office in Bridgeport, 60 years old, and I understood, for the first time in my adult life, that the small white form had not been a tuition transfer. I lowered my eyes. "Lay," I said, very quietly, to no one. She gave them the signature. Lou did not speak. The fan hummed in the corner. The cigar in the ashtray went on burning by itself. A delivery truck idled outside the window. I do not know how long I sat there. I know that Lou Castellucci, who had been my friend for 30 years, and who knew when a man was being broken in front of him, did me the favor of saying nothing. He did not look at me. He did not move. He sat across from me with his hands folded and waited for me to come back to him. When I finally lifted my eyes, his were on the laptop on his desk. "Frankie," he said, "before you do anything, before you call your daughter, before you call your brother, I need you to look at one more thing." He turned the laptop slowly toward me. "It is about this DiNapoli group." Lou's laptop showed a black tree diagram on a white background. At the top was a single name, DiNapoli Restaurant Group, LLC, registered in Delaware. 2017, from the name, 10 lines branched downward. Each line led to a subsidiary. DiNapoli Hospitality South. DiNapoli Holdings Midwest. DiNapoli Procurement Northeast. Names like that. 10 of them. Beside each subsidiary, Lou had typed 2 numbers. The first was the listed employee count. The second was the actual employee count. I read down the column. DiNapoli Hospitality South, listed 47, actual 0. DiNapoli Holdings Midwest, listed 31, actual 0. DiNapoli Procurement Northeast, listed 19, actual 0, the same pattern, down the column. 8 of the 10 subsidiaries had no employees at all. The other 2 had what Lou had marked, in parenthesis, as one administrative assistant who is also their administrative assistant. I looked up at Lou. "What is this? Shells?" Lou said. "Frankie, these are shells. 8 of these companies do not exist. They have an EIN. They have an address. The address is a post office box in Wilmington. The phone numbers route to a voicemail nobody picks up. The same registered agent files them all. Every quarter, a few $1,000,000 goes into each of them, gets shuffled to the next one, and leaves the country. For where Cayman, Cyprus, the Channel Islands, sometimes Latvia. Depending on who is watching, the fan in the corner hummed. Lou, you are telling me my son-in-law's company is a laundering operation. I am telling you it has been one for at least 4 years. And I am telling you, he said, his voice dropping a half note, that this is not me guessing. This is me calling a man I worked with at the Treasury Department in 1993. I called him this morning at 5:30 because I was already worried before I went to bed last night. There is a joint task force, Treasury and FBI, that has been looking at DiNapoli Restaurant Group for 14 months. The case is active. 3 of the principals have been quietly indicted in sealed filings. I sat very still in his client chair. My throat had gone dry. I had not eaten since the wedding. The cigar smell of the office, which I had not noticed when I walked in, suddenly seemed very strong. Why has nobody moved? Because they are waiting for the next acquisition. Lou turned the laptop slightly so I could see it better. DiNapoli needs to take a clean, real, family-owned business and absorb it. They have done this twice before. A bakery in Detroit in 2021. A small chain of pizzerias in Pittsburgh in 2023. Both bought out, both quietly milked for clean asset transactions. Both run into the ground inside 2 years. Both of those families are bankrupt now. He paused. Frankie. The third acquisition is Petrelli's. I did not say anything for a moment. And Ethan, I said. Ethan is the introducer. Ethan does not run the laundering. Ethan finds the families. He is the friendly young Harvard MBA with good manners, who marries the daughter and folds the family into the network. He is paid in a percentage of the post-acquisition cycle. About $4 million, I estimate, for this one. He has done it once before. The Pittsburgh chain. See Vincent. Vincent thinks it is a buyout. Vincent does not know what DiNapoli is, in my opinion. Vincent is a small man. Frankie. Small men do not get told about the federal layer. They get told their cut is $6 million and to keep their mouth shut. And they say yes. And they think they got the better end of the deal. And Sophia. Lou looked at me very directly. Frankie. Sophia has been used. I cannot prove that to you in this office, but I have looked at the paper trail for 2 hours this morning, and there is nothing on it that says Sophia knew about DiNapoli. There are pieces of paper she has signed that are concerning. There are not pieces of paper that would put her in front of a grand jury. I took a slow breath. What happens if I sign Friday? Lou closed the laptop. If you sign on Friday, Frankie, you become a knowing participant in a federal wire fraud scheme. You go to prison with them, 10 to 15 years. probably 8, with good behavior. You will be 70 when you come out. You will not see your grandchild grow up. Your name will be on the indictment alongside Ethan's. And if I do not sign, if you do not sign and you bring what we have to the treasury man I spoke to this morning, you might end up with the restaurants back. You might also bury your brother and your son-in-law in federal court. He looked at me. The cigar in the ashtray had finally gone out. Frankie, he said quietly, the choice in front of you is not a choice between honor and money. It is a choice between 2 prisons. One has bars. The other has Christmases without your daughter in them. I want you to understand that before you walk out of this office, I sat with my hands on my knees. And my daughter, I said. Lou did not answer. I stood up. I left my coat on the back of the chair. I walked out of his office into the November afternoon, and the rain was coming down hard on Halsted Street now. And I walked the 4 blocks to where I had parked my car without an umbrella, without my coat, without lifting my hand to wipe the rain off my face. A delivery driver swore at me from a doorway. A bus went past, spraying water across the sidewalk. I did not turn my head. I had become, for the first time in 60 years of my life, a man with too many people to protect and no clear sense of which of them deserved it. I drove in the rain for 3 hours. I do not remember most of those hours. I remember the windshield wipers turning at a speed slightly faster than the rain required, because I had not adjusted them when I started the car. I remember sitting at the corner of Roosevelt and Halsted for 2 cycles of a green light without moving, until someone behind me leaned on his horn. I remember finally pulling into the alley behind my own house in Oak Park at 11:50 at night and seeing, through the kitchen window, that the light over the stove was on. Only one person had a key to that back door besides me. I sat in the car a minute longer. The alley was empty. A neighbor's garbage can was tipped sideways from the wind. I took the wet from my hair with my hand, and I made myself remember every single thing Lou had said about Sophia and the paper trail before I opened the door of the car. I crossed the alley and let myself in through the side gate and walked up the back steps and quietly opened the kitchen door. Sophia was sitting on the high stool at the kitchen island, hunched over her phone, gripping it in both hands like a woman trying to crush it. Her eyes were wet. The light over the stove was painting one side of her face very harshly. She had not heard me come in. I closed the door behind me. Softly. She jumped. The phone clattered face down on the marble. "Papa!" She slid off the stool. "Oh my God, you are soaked." She crossed the kitchen and threw her arms around me. The wool of my suit was wet through the shoulders, and the rain on my face went into her hair. And I felt her sob once against my chest before she got control of it. "Papa, where have you been? I have been here since 9. Uncle Vincent called me. He said you walked out of Lou's office without saying anything. I drove over, and I have been calling you, and your phone has been off, and I have been sitting here imagining the worst kinds of things." She stopped. She pressed her face harder against my chest. "Papa, please sign the papers Friday. Please, for me. For the family." I held her. I held her the way I had held her since she was 3 days old, with one hand spread across her shoulder blades and the other cupped behind her head. I let her cry against me. I waited. When she lifted her hand to wipe her cheek, the sleeve of her sweater pulled back, and I saw the bruise on the inside of her right wrist. It was small, 2 finger-sized marks, dark blue-purple, on the underside of her wrist, where a man would grip a woman who was trying to leave a room. The kind of bruise that is invisible at a distance and impossible to miss when you have known the wrist since the day it was born. I did not say anything about the bruise. I did not look at it twice. I let my eyes pass over it the way a man's eyes pass over a thing he intends to remember in a colder room. "Sophia," I said. My voice was gentle. I made it gentle on purpose. "Listen to me." She lifted her head. "I have been very confused this week. The wedding. Everything. I have not been thinking clearly. Your uncle was right to worry. I should have called. I am sorry." She nodded. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I have been talking to Lou this afternoon. About the buyout. About my retirement. He has helped me see things more clearly. Friday morning at the lawyer's. I will sign whatever needs to be signed. I want this to go through, Mia cara. I want what is best for you." She breathed out as if I had taken something heavy off her chest. She also, in the half-second before she controlled it, looked at me with a flicker of something that was not relief. It was closer to fear. The fear of a woman who has been told what will happen to her if she fails. I kissed the top of her head. I told her to drive carefully. I told her to text me when she got home. I walked her to the back door. I watched her walk down the steps with her sweater pulled down over both wrists. When her headlights swung out of the alley, I went back into the kitchen. My shirt was wet on the right shoulder where her tears had run into the wool. I did not change it. I sat down at the kitchen table for a moment and put both hands flat on the wood. And I waited until my breathing was even. I looked at the olive tree on the sill. The leaves were perfectly still. There was no light coming from the moon. I picked up my phone. I opened my call log. I tapped the number Alessandra Russo had written on the back of her business card for after hours. She answered on the second ring. "Set the meeting for Friday morning," I said. "Bring everything. Envelope 3 included." There was a small pause. "Mr. Petrelli, Envelope 3 cannot be opened until I know. There is a stop I need to make first." She did not ask what stop. "Where are you going?" she said. "Phoenix." I hung up. I set the phone face down on the table beside my mother's 3 unread words and my grandfather's pocket watch. The olive tree did not move, but I would have sworn, looking at it then, that the room had gotten warmer. I did not sleep that Tuesday night either. I sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours after Sophia drove away, in the wet shirt with her tears in the wool, and I worked through what I knew. I knew the buyout was a federal crime. I knew my brother had stood in my father's office last Saturday and called me a rich man's victory. I knew my daughter, the one piece of my life I had been certain of for 28 years, had handed my signature to a man who was going to send me to prison. I knew the only thing standing between Petrelli's and a Cayman Islands account, in Vincent's name, was a single sealed envelope on Alessandra Russo's desk and a man somewhere in Phoenix who did not yet know I existed. I did not know who that man was. At 5:30, I booked a one-way ticket to Phoenix on the 11:55 out of O'Hare. At 6, I drove back to the Oak Park house. At 6:15, I was standing in my mother's bedroom in the same wet wool suit, with the lights off, looking down at the carved olive wood box on her vanity. I had not looked at the 36 photographs since Sunday afternoon. I took them out now. I laid them in order along the bedspread, 8 rows of 4 with the last row of 4. 36 photographs. I counted them twice. I picked the empty cardboard sleeve up to put it back in the box. It was too heavy. I held it against the lamp on her bedside table. The cardboard had thickness at the back, where there should have been none. A small flap had been pressed flush and held in place by adhesive that had been weakened, by my guess, with the careful application of a hot kitchen knife on some afternoon when nobody else was in the house. I worked the flap open with my thumbnail. There was one more photograph. It was the only color one. It was sharper than the others. It had been printed by a real lab, not an old drugstore. It showed a young man of about 33 standing on a sunlit terrace in front of a small restaurant with a hand-painted sign that read, Bella Notte. He was wiping down an outdoor table with a white cloth. He had paused mid-motion and was turning his face toward whoever held the camera. His shoulders were lean. His hairline had begun to step back the way mine had at his age. His mouth was slightly open in a half-question. It was my face. It was my face at 33 years old. I sat down on the edge of my mother's bed, and I did not stand up for a long time. I had been 33 years old in 1998. I had been married to Maria for 9 years. We had a son named Marco, who was 7. We were a year out from a Lake Michigan storm that had taken our small boat down off Montrose Harbor, with both of them aboard, and that, the Coast Guard had told me at 3 in the morning, had left no bodies to recover. I had buried 2 empty caskets in a Catholic cemetery in Maywood the following spring. I turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back, in pencil, in my mother's hand. It was longer than her other notes. I read it once. I read it 3 times. His name now is Marco Vitale. He grew up in Phoenix as Maria Romano's son. He has not been told the rest. That is up to you, figlio mio. Go to him before they do. The morning light came on slowly outside the window. The room got slightly grayer. I held the photograph in both hands and I did not move. I do not remember how I got to the airport. I remember that I packed nothing. I took the photograph. I took the brass key, which I would not need. I took the pocket watch. I took my mother's 3 unread words and the small folded letter and slid them into the inside pocket of the dry suit I had changed into without noticing. I drove to O'Hare. I parked in the long-term lot. I went through security like a man walking a hallway he had walked many times in a dream. I sat in seat 13C with the photograph face down on the tray table for 2 hours and 20 minutes. I did not turn it over. I did not order a drink. The man beside me read the Wall Street Journal and did not speak to me, for which I was grateful. When the captain announced the descent into Phoenix Sky Harbor, I closed my eyes. I did not open them again until the wheels touched the ground. The seatbelt light went off. I stood up. My right knee gave for 1 step, the way a knee gives in a man who has been running on no sleep for 3 days, and I caught the seat back in front of me and held it until I was steady. The jet bridge was hot. The Arizona air came in through the open hatch in a wave I had forgotten about. The kind of dry, late-afternoon heat that makes Midwestern men remember they are not from here. I walked out into the terminal. I had the photograph in my inside pocket. I had no idea what I was going to say to him when I found him. I had no idea, frankly, whether the man in the photograph would even let me close enough to say it. I took a taxi from Sky Harbor to the Roosevelt District at 6 o'clock in the evening. The driver was an older man who, by the way he handled the wheel through the heat-rippled streets and by the small wooden cross on his dashboard, was Mexican Catholic. He did not try to make conversation. I gave him the address printed on the front of the small restaurant in the photograph in my pocket. Bella Notte, 6th and Garfield. He drove me there in the silence I had been needing for hours. He let me out across the street. I paid him in cash. I tipped him too much. I stood on the sidewalk for a full minute after he drove off, in the late Arizona sun, and I looked across the street at the restaurant my mother had photographed 7 years ago. It was painted red brick, old brick. A patio under a wooden trellis hung with bougainvillea so heavy the trellis sagged in the middle. A hand-painted sign across the front, Bella Notte, beautiful night. The same name a small village trattoria in the Sicilian hills had carried on the side of a tin shed when my father was a boy. The smell of the place came across the street to me, even from where I stood. Wood smoke, garlic, tomato, somebody's oregano frying in oil, the smells of every Petrelli kitchen I had ever stood in a city 1,700 miles away. I crossed to a stone bench on the opposite sidewalk and I sat down. I watched the restaurant for 20 minutes. I did not go in. I watched the bartender pour drinks, the same way bartenders pour drinks anywhere. I watched a young waitress in a blue apron carry plates to 2 tables on the patio. I watched 2 old men finish a bottle of wine without speaking to each other for nearly 40 minutes, in the way only Italian men of a certain age finish a bottle of wine together. I watched the day get slower, and then, just past 6:30, I saw him. He came out of the kitchen and leaned across the bar counter. He was talking to someone in the back, gesturing with his right hand, the way my father used to gesture when he was describing how to dice an onion correctly. A small chopping motion, gentle, wrist loose. I had not seen anyone make that gesture since my father died 11 years ago. I had not been aware, until that moment, that I had been looking for it. He was 34 years old. He was lean. He wore a white kitchen shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had a small white towel over his left shoulder. His hairline had stepped back the way mine had at his age. His mouth, when he smiled at whatever the cook in the back had said, was my mouth. I did not stand up. I sat on the bench across the street, and I thought about the man my mother had spent 4 years bringing me carefully toward. And I asked myself, in the dry Arizona light, what right I had to walk into the doorway of a restaurant that did not belong to me and present myself to a man who had been alive every day for the last 25 years that I had been mourning him. I did not know what Maria had told him about me. I did not know whether Maria had told him I had let him drown. Maria had been a complicated woman. She had loved me, and she had also, when she had needed to, been capable of saving herself or our son or whatever else needed saving, at the price of telling herself a story about me that made saving easier. I did not know whether the story she had finally told him on her deathbed had been a kind one. I sat. I watched. At 7, he came out the front door of the restaurant. He locked it behind him with a small brass key on a leather cord. He pulled a denim jacket on. He turned, and he started walking down Garfield toward the south. I got up off the bench. I crossed the street. I followed him at half a block. He walked the way my father had walked. Not in any way I could have explained. Just the rhythm of it. He stopped at a small coffee shop 2 blocks down. Late evening. The windows already lit yellow. He stood outside, took a phone out of his pocket, and called someone. He listened. He laughed. The way he laughed was the way Antonio Petrelli had laughed. The head slightly back, the hand coming up to the chest. The sound of it carried half a block to me in the dry desert air, and it went through me clean. I took my grandfather's pocket watch out of my vest pocket. I opened the lid. I looked at the 3 words inside. Tu non sei solo. I closed the lid. I put the watch back. I crossed the rest of the half block. I remember thinking, very calmly, that if he turned around and told me to leave, I would leave, and I would never tell anyone in my family that I had stood on a Phoenix sidewalk and looked at the back of my son's neck. I stopped 2 feet behind him. He was still on the phone, half turned away. He did not see me. I tapped him on the shoulder. He turned. Our eyes met. He took half a step back. The phone fell against his ear and stayed there. He did not speak. He did not breathe, I think, for nearly 5 seconds. He had recognized me. Even before I had said a single word. He had recognized me. Nonna told me you would come one day, Marco said. She just didn't tell me what to say. He said it in Italian. His Italian had a Phoenix accent. The vowels were softer. The rhythm carried a small Spanish lilt at the edges. It was nothing like the Italian I had grown up with on the south side of Chicago. It was, for that reason, more beautiful. I did not say anything. He took the phone away from his ear. He told whoever was on the other end that he would call back. He hung up. He slid the phone into the pocket of his denim jacket and looked at me for a long second, in the way a man looks at the answer to a question he has been carrying since he was 16 years old. "Inside," he said, in English now. "I shouldn't have you on a sidewalk." He pushed the door of the coffee shop open and held it for me. The young woman behind the counter said, "Hey, Marco." When we walked in, he nodded at her. He held up 2 fingers. She started 2 espressos without asking what kind. He led me to a back booth, by the window, where the late sun was making a square of red on the laminate table, and we sat across from each other. Neither of us touched the coffee when it came. "How long have you known," I said, "that you exist?" "Yes, since I was 18. November of 2007. My mother told me on her last afternoon, in the hospital in Mesa." He paused. "She was not my mother. She was your wife's friend, Maria Romano. She was 48 when she took me. She never married. She raised me as her own son for 9 years. She had taught me to make agnolotti at 11. She had walked me to school in the wrong shoes for 3 days, the year my feet grew faster than her paycheck, and she had not once let me see her cry over it. And before she died, she sat me up in the bed, the way only she could sit me up in the bed, and she told me what your wife had asked her to tell me when the time came. I waited. So Maria, my real mother, died in 1999 in a Lake Michigan storm. She did not drown by accident. She drowned because she had agreed, with your mother, to drown. She put me on a boat with a friend of your father's a week before. A retired FBI man. I do not remember it. I was 7. Maria Romano told me the man drove me to St. Louis and then to Phoenix, and that she had been waiting for me in the parking lot of a Catholic school in West Phoenix with the keys to her car and a new name for me. I closed my eyes for a moment. 25 years of grief I had carried as an accident was, in one sentence, being recast as a price. The difference was the difference between a tragedy and a choice. He drank a sip of the espresso. He set it down. "Now there was a man in Chicago," he said. "A man you had testified against. A man who had ordered something to be done to your family. Maria Petrelli, my mother, heard about it. She went to your mother. The 2 of them did what they did. They saved one of us. The one who could be saved without you finding out. Without my finding out. Yes. Why?" He looked at me across the table. "Maria did not trust you to keep the secret. Mr. Petrelli. He used my last name carefully. As a man uses a tool he is not sure how to hold. She was not afraid you would tell anyone you knew I was alive. She was afraid you would tell Vincent. She was afraid that the same man who would spend the next 25 years preparing to take what was left of your name would have, in 1999, traded the location of a 7-year-old boy to the wrong man for whatever Vincent thought he was owed. She was, in her own way, looking out for both of us, including from each other. I sat very still. He took out his phone. He scrolled back a long way. He held it up to me. It was a text message exchange. The other contact had no name, only an icon, a small red rose. The last message in the thread was dated June 2nd, 2020, 2 days before my mother died. When your father comes, don't make him beg. He has begged enough in his life. I read it once. I read it again. My mother had been dying when she wrote it. She had been 3 days from a coma she would not wake up from, and she had spent one of her last conscious moments writing instructions to a grandson she had never been allowed to embrace, on the chance that he would one day need to know how to receive me. I did not cry. I do not know why I did not cry. I think I had been crying internally for so many hours by that point that my body had simply forgotten how to do it with the eyes. Marco took the phone back. He set it face down on the laminate table between us, beside the 2 untouched espressos. "Why now?" he said. "Why did Nonna tell you about me now?" I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I took out the voluntary buyout agreement that Vincent had brought to my house in October. I unfolded it on the table. I turned it so he could read the first page. He read the first page. He turned it. He read the second page. He set the document down very carefully. The way a man sets a thing down when he is making sure he does not slap it. "Show me the rest," he said. We took the 7:40 flight to Chicago the next morning. Marco closed his restaurant for the week. He told his head cook he was going to bury someone in Chicago, which was, when I thought about it, technically true. He paid his bartender 3 weeks of wages in cash before we left. He packed 1 canvas bag. He took a small box from a high shelf above his bed that I did not see him open, and he put the box into the canvas bag. And he was ready before I had finished tying my own shoes. We sat in the second-to-last row. He had the window. I had the aisle. Between us, the middle seat was occupied by a young woman in a business suit who put her headphones on the moment the cabin door closed and did not take them off for the entire flight. He waited until we leveled off above the Sonoran Desert. "You should know the rest," he said quietly. I nodded. In 1999, you testified against a man in a murder trial. His name was Salvatore Mancini. You did not know him. You had seen him at a gas station on Western Avenue the night a young woman from Pilsen was killed in an alley behind it. You picked him out of a 6-pack. The U.S. Attorney's office told you that your testimony was minor. They told you that your name would not appear in any public filing. They were wrong about the second thing. There was a clerk in the office who sold names. Maria's cousin, Teresa, worked for the defense attorney for one of Mancini's associates. And Teresa saw your name on a list. I sat very still. Teresa called Maria the next morning. Maria called your mother that afternoon. Your mother called a man named Dominic Briganti, who had retired the year before from the FBI. They were 3 women and an old G-man, and they had 4 days to do what they did. Marco took a careful breath. Mancini did not care about Sophia. She was 2. She was unlikely to remember anything. He cared about your wife and your son. Specifically, he cared about your son. Maria figured out that a wife who lost her son would not testify at the appeal, and a man who lost his son would lose his stomach for any of it. They were going to take me first. Maria did not want to find out what they did to me before they took me. I closed my eyes. She put me on a boat with Dominic Briganti on a Tuesday afternoon. She told me we were going fishing. I was 7. I do not remember Maria's face that day. I remember the smell of the gasoline at the marina and a small wooden duck Dominic had on the dashboard of his car. Where did you go? Hi, St. Louis. By the next morning. By the day after. Phoenix. Maria Romano was waiting for me in a parking lot at a Catholic school on the west side. She had a hot ham sandwich in a wax paper bag and a copy of Charlotte's Web. She had spent the week of her life so far that I do not remember preparing for a boy she had never met. He paused. Pian on the Sunday. 4 days later. Maria took the boat out from the small dock at Diversey Harbor and turned it north into a storm that had been on the weather report for 3 days. She did not return. The body washed up at Wilmette 6 days later. There was nothing on it Mancini could doubt. She was, by her own choice, very dead. Mancini believed both of us were gone. He stopped looking. 2 months later, he went to prison for 38 years on the original conviction. He died in prison in 2013. Marco turned his head against the small airplane window. I did not speak. I did not know what to say to a man explaining to me that his mother had pointed her own boat at a Lake Michigan storm, rather than risk waiting 1 more week for a different kind of man to find us first. Marco, he looked back. Did she at the end, did Maria say anything she wanted me to know? He took a moment. On her last afternoon, in Mesa, when Maria Romano was telling me about you, she said one thing that Maria had told her to repeat to me when the time came. He looked at me very steadily. She said, "Tell him I didn't doubt his love. Tell him I doubted he could survive knowing our son was alive and not being allowed to see him. Tell him I was wrong. Tell him I am sorry." I put my hand flat on the tray table and held it there for a long moment. I had been carrying a single piece of grief on my back for 25 years. I had not understood, until that moment in row 27 of a Boeing 737, that the grief had been the wrong shape the whole time. It was not the grief of a man whose wife had died in a storm. It was the grief of a man whose wife had given her life to save his son, and whose son had grown up not being allowed to call him father. The grief was a different weight in a different place. I was going to have to learn to carry it from a new angle. We landed at O'Hare at 2 in the afternoon. I drove us downtown. We parked in the underground garage of the LaSalle Street Tower. We took the elevator up to the 32nd floor. Alessandra Russo was waiting for us in the lobby. She looked at Marco for a long second without speaking. Then she walked toward us, extended her hand to him in the careful European way of a woman trained never to embrace a man she has just met, and said, very softly, in his mother's language, "Benvenuto, Marco. Tua nonna mi ha parlato molto di te. Welcome, Marco. Your grandmother spoke of you often." The conference room on the 32nd floor was made of glass on 3 sides. I walked into it at 10 minutes to 10 on Friday morning, wearing the same navy suit I had worn to Phoenix and back, freshly pressed in a hotel down the block where I had spent 5 hours of broken sleep. Marco was waiting in Alessandra Russo's office down the hall. In a charcoal suit, Alessandra had sent a junior associate out to buy for him at 6 the night before. I had not slept enough. He had not slept enough. We had stopped pretending to be men who needed sleep. Vincent, Ethan, and Sophia were already at the table. Ethan stood when I walked in, the way a son-in-law stands. He held out his hand. He smiled. He was wearing the same kind of expensive watch he had been wearing at the wedding, and he had the buyout papers laid out in 3 crisp piles on the polished walnut, and a tray of pastries in the corner, and a junior partner of his own firm in a far chair to witness. "Frank, glad you made it. We have you out of here in 20 minutes. I sat down across from him. I did not take his hand. Vincent leaned over. "You all right, Frankie? You look like a man who needs a coffee." "I am all right, Vincent." Sophia did not look up from her hands. She was wearing a long-sleeved gray sweater that came down over the inside of her wrists. She had not touched the pastry on the small plate in front of her. Alessandra Russo walked in then. She was wearing the same charcoal suit. She had 2 folders. She closed the conference room door behind her, set the folders down at the head of the table, and remained standing. "Good morning. Before Mr. Petrelli signs anything," she said, "I am required by the Petrelli Family Trust, as restated in 2019, to read one document on the record." Ethan's smile did not move for a fraction of a second too long. "Of course, counsel. Whatever the trust requires." "Thank you." She opened the first folder. She read, in the precise courtroom voice she had once used clerking for a federal judge, the unanimous consent clause from envelope number 1. She read the list of the 5 founding members: Antonio Petrelli, deceased; Rosa Petrelli, deceased; Frank Petrelli, Vincent Petrelli, and one further name, redacted in the original document and now made whole. Vincent's face went the color of milk that had been left out too long. "The 5th member," Alessandra said, "is present today." The conference room door opened. Marco walked in. He paused for one moment in the doorway. The light from the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the side of his face, and for half a second, every person in that room could see the resemblance to my father in 1960, and to me in 1998, and the impossibility of arguing with what they were looking at. He was wearing the charcoal suit. His hair had been combed. He was carrying a manila folder under his left arm. He did not look at any of them. He walked directly to the chair beside mine, which I had pulled out for him an hour earlier, and he sat down. And he placed the manila folder on the table in front of him. And he opened it. Sophia made a small sound. The kind of sound a woman makes when she has been told to run, and her body has not yet decided which direction. Vincent's water glass hit the carpet. He did not appear to notice. Ethan stood up. Marco took out a current Arizona driver's license in the name of Marco Vitale and laid it face up on the table. His hands were steady. My father's hands had been steady the same way. Steady was a Petrelli thing. Steady belonged to us. Then he took out a notarized affidavit, 3 pages, sealed at the bottom by a notary in Maricopa County, declaring under penalty of perjury that the person known publicly as Marco Vitale was by birth Marco Petrelli, son of Frank Petrelli and Maria Petrelli of Chicago, Illinois, born June 19, 1991. He placed the affidavit beside the license. Alessandra," he said. Alessandra nodded. "Subject to the verification protocol established in Section 7 of the Trust, the 5th founding member is hereby identified and seated. The unanimous consent provision is now invocable. Mr. Petrelli Frank, do you wish to invoke?" "I do." "Why then, the proposed sale of any controlling interest in Petrelli's trattoria, including the proposed acquisition by DiNapoli Restaurant Group LLC, requires the signature of all 5 founding members. Only 3 of those signatures appear on the document currently before this table. As trustee of the elder Mrs. Petrelli's voting share, I withhold the 4th on the record. Mr. Marco Petrelli withholds the 5th on the record. She paused. The sale, as drafted, fails. Ethan was already moving toward the door. He had it open. He had stepped 1 foot into the hallway. And then he stopped. Because a woman in a charcoal trench coat had stepped into the doorway in front of him, holding up a small leather badge. "Mr. Calloway," she said, very pleasantly. "Special Agent Diane Vargas, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I would like to speak with you about DiNapoli Restaurant Group." Ethan's head turned, just slightly, toward Vincent. Vincent was sitting in his chair with his mouth open, watching the carpet darken where the water glass had spilled. Marco placed his hand on my shoulder. It was the first time anyone in my family had touched me since I had walked out of my own wedding. Sophia leaned across the corner of the table, very slightly, so that only I could hear her. And she whispered, with her sleeves pulled tight over both wrists, "Papa, please, let me explain. He has things on me." She came to the back door at 9 o'clock. It was raining harder by then. The kind of cold November rain that turns to sleet in an hour. I had been in the front parlor since the federal agents had finished with me at 3. Marco was in his hotel room downtown. I had built a fire in the parlor fireplace. The first I had built in the Oak Park house since my mother died. And I had been watching it for 6 hours without doing much else. The doorbell rang once. I knew who it was before I got there. She was standing on the back step. Her hair was wet. Her mascara had run down both cheeks in 2 black lines. She was holding a manila folder in both arms across her chest, the way a woman holds a folder when she is using it as a small piece of armor between her body and the rest of the world. "Papa," she said. Then she stopped. Then she said, "I do not know how to start this." I stepped aside. I let her in. She did not sit down. She walked past me into the parlor, stood in front of the fireplace with her back to me, and pulled her coat off without turning around. The cuffs of her gray sweater were still pulled down over both wrists. "I'm going to show you something," she said. She set the folder on the coffee table. She did not open it yet. She turned to face me. "You have to listen to all of it, even the parts you do not want to hear, especially those parts." I sat down in the chair across from the sofa. She opened the folder. The first photograph was a doctored image of her in handcuffs, being escorted out of what looked like a Las Vegas casino by 2 security guards in dark suits. The lighting was wrong. The shadows did not match. It was, even to a man who did not know her face the way I knew her face, an obvious composite. To me it was clumsy. But to a Chicago PTA, or to a newspaper, or to a man who had been told for 3 years that his daughter had a gambling problem, it would have looked very real. "This is from the summer I was 24, she said. "I lost $400 in Vegas. Drunk. Stupid. I told you about it the next morning. You laughed and made me promise to call you next time I planned to be stupid in Nevada." I remember. She turned the next page. A series of text message screenshots, all from a number with no contact name. The first one was from August, 2 years ago. Ethan, identified by his own initials at the bottom of each. He had threatened to release the photograph if she ever told me about a single thing she had begun to suspect about him. He had threatened to release it to my parishioners. He had threatened to release it to her future children's schools. He had threatened to release it, finally, in a message dated 3 weeks ago, to me directly, with a caption that read, "Your father deserves to know what kind of woman he raised." I read every message. I did not look away. She turned the last page. There was no message on the last page. There was a black and white printout of an ultrasound photograph. The date at the top was 11 days ago. The fetal age, 8 weeks. He found out 4 days before the wedding, she said. He told me if I did not get you to sign on Friday, he would not let the baby be born. She lifted both wrists at the same time, and she pulled the sweater sleeves up. There were finger-shaped bruises on both wrists, not just the right one. The newer ones were on the left. The colors went from dark blue-purple down to a yellow-green that meant some of them were 3 or 4 weeks old. "I know I do not deserve forgiveness," she said. She was crying now, but quietly, in the way a woman cries when she has been crying for a long time before she walked through the door. "I know what I did. The signature. The story about your memory. Letting Uncle Vincent and Ethan call you confused in front of doctors I did not even know were doctors. I have been a coward for 2 years. Papa, I knew you were not losing your mind. I knew. And I told myself every morning that I would fix it tomorrow, and every night I went to bed without fixing it because I was afraid of him. Please, please, just do not tell me to leave." I sat very still. I do not know how long I sat. When I stood up slowly, in the way an old man stands up. And I walked across the room, and I sat down on the edge of the coffee table directly in front of her. "Vieni qui," I said. "Come here." She did not move at first. I held out my hand. She came. She crouched down beside me on the rug in front of the fire, and she leaned her wet hair against the shoulder of my shirt, and she cried in a way that lasted, by my count, almost 12 minutes. I did not say a word. I held the back of her neck with one hand. The other hand picked up my phone from the coffee table. I dialed Alessandra Russo's after-hours number. She answered. "Move forward with the federal complaint," I said. "All of them, including Ethan." I paused. "Especially Ethan." I set the phone down. Outside the parlor window, the rain had turned to snow. The sign on the storefront of the small Petrelli's location on Taylor Street. The only one of the 3 I had kept. Read in fresh hand-painted letters across the top in gold and dark green. Rosa's table. La familia non finisce. The family does not end. It was the 3rd Sunday in June. 8 months had passed since the night the rain had turned to snow outside my parlor window. The other 2 locations had been sold to a small Italian family in Cicero that paid a fair price in cash and asked, on the day they signed, whether they could keep the wine list. I had given them the wine list. They had asked me if they could change the name on the awnings. I had told them they had to. Vincent had not called me in 8 months. The last anyone had heard. He was in a 1-bedroom in Boca Raton, working at a restaurant supply store. He had not been charged federally. Lou had argued for that, in his quiet way, and so had I. He had been a small man, and small men go quietly. Ethan would, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office, be entering a guilty plea on 6 counts of federal wire fraud in September. The sentencing recommendation was 15 years. Father DeLuca arrived at 9:30 to bless the building. He went room by room with a small brass holy water sprinkler my mother had bought him in Rome years ago. He sprinkled the door, the bar, the kitchen, the long table in the center of the dining room. The table was set for 8. He stopped in front of the chair at the head of it, the chair we had left empty on purpose, and he bowed his head for a second longer than he had bowed it at any of the others. Then he came over and embraced me. "Your mother," he said into my ear, in Italian, "would have been very angry that we did not start 10 minutes earlier." I laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. Marco came out of the kitchen in a white chef's coat. He had hired 2 line cooks in the past month, and a young woman from Phoenix to run his front of house for the first 3 months, because, he had told me, he did not yet trust anyone in Chicago who was not already in the family. Sophia was at the bar arranging glasses. She was wearing a server's apron over her dress. She had her hair pulled back. A small infant girl, 3 weeks old, was asleep in a soft cloth sling across her chest. We had named the baby Rosa, after my mother, with no debate. Lillian arrived at 9:45 with her camera bag. She had photographed many things in the past 8 months. She was a friend now in the way people who walk into a room at the right moment become friends. She set the bag down. She walked over to me. She took something out of her coat pocket and pressed it into my hand without making a show of it. The pocket watch. I had given it to her at Christmas to be cleaned, and she had taken longer than I expected, and I had not asked. She closed my fingers around it. "My grandmother," she said quietly, "was a friend of Maria's. She knew about the storm. She kept the secret for 40 years. She gave me this watch on her own deathbed 3 years ago and told me to find the right man, on the right night, and put it back in his pocket." I held the watch for a long moment. I opened the lid. "Tu non sei solo." The same 3 words. They looked different to me in the light coming through the front window of Rosa's table than they had looked under a half-dead neon sign on an October sidewalk. Sophia came out of the kitchen with the first plate of cannoli of the morning, 4 of them, freshly fried by my son. She set the plate in the center of the table. She kissed the side of my face. She went back to her bar. I picked one of the cannoli up. I bit into it. The shell broke against my teeth like a small firecracker. The sweet ricotta and the bright orange zest filled my tongue all at once. This time, the cannoli had taste. Father DeLuca raised his hand at the head of the table. "Nel nome del Padre," he began, "e del Figlio, e dello Spirito Santo." I picked up my linen napkin. I folded it in half. I folded it in half again. The way my father had taught me to fold a napkin when I was 8 years old. The way I had folded a stranger's napkin in the dim hallway between the wine cellar and the coat check of Petrelli's Trattoria on the night Ethan had given his toast. This time, when I finished folding it, I did not tuck it into anything. I laid it gently on the table, beside the empty chair, in the square of morning sunlight that was falling exactly on the place where my mother used to sit. I want to tell you, before I go, the only thing I learned in those 8 months that I think might be worth carrying away with you. Rebuilding is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not letting someone off the hook. It is taking your own wrists out of the cuffs you did not realize you had been wearing. And it is never too late, at 60 years old, to learn how to stand up straight in a room you thought had been arranged to bury you. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this story found you for a reason, tell me in a single sentence the chair in your life that is still empty, and then go and sit in it. The light moved slightly on the chair beside me. The watch was warm in my pocket. and the empire I had once believed I was about to lose was not, after all, an empire. It was a table. It was always a table.